All right, and we're back with another episode of Black Life Amplified. It's the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. And before we get started, I want to give a very special thank you to our sponsors, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, Northpoint Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. I also want to say thank you to our community partner organizations, which include Northpoint Health and Wellness, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, Gray Matter, the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. We've now been doing this town hall for over a year, and these entities have all been responsible for making sure we're able to serve our community in this way. Now, if you didn't get a chance to watch last week's show, we talked about the pandemic and reparations. So if you have any questions about reparations and the fight for equity during the pandemic, you can go to the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page and YouTube page to view the full conversation. Now, today's episode of Black Life Amplified is focused on the recent events that have taken place within the Twin Cities and surrounding suburbs. Daunte Wright, a 20-year-old Black man in Brooklyn Center, was murdered at the hands of police just days before the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial. Community members took to the streets, outraged, grieving, and in protest at yet another state-sanctioned shooting. Operation Safety Net, which is the public safety plan that was created to protect community and support safe exercising of our community's First Amendment rights during the Derek Chauvin trial, was moved into phase 3 and used to subdue growing crowds of protesters in Brooklyn Center. So we've got a lot to talk about today. But first, of course, we have to do a quick update on the Derek Chauvin trial. So yesterday afternoon, it was announced that the jury unanimously voted finding Derek Chauvin guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Local protesters, as well as those who came from around the country, took to the streets to celebrate this historic conviction. To honor the life of George Floyd, Daunte Wright, Philando Castile, and countless others who have lost their lives at the hands of the police, and they wanted to affirm that the work for true justice is far from over. It said that Chauvin could face up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, up to 25 years for third-degree murder, and up to 10 years for manslaughter. Now, Minnesota's sentencing guidelines recommend about 12 and a half years in prison for each of these murder charges and about 4 years for manslaughter, but the state of Minnesota is asking for a tougher sentence given the severity of this case. So we'll have more on that in just a little while. In fact, we are going to have a special episode of Black Life Amplified this Friday at 10 a.m. to unpack the Chauvin verdicts a little bit more, as well as to continue sharing information on what's been happening in the Twin Cities as it relates to public safety, social unrest, and a call for change as it relates to public safety. For more updates on what's happening with the Derek Chauvin trial, as well as the 3 additional officers that will be soon having their day in court, check out Insight News or the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder for additional trial coverage. Now, last night, the world took a collective exhale after the announcement of Derek Chauvin's conviction, but many found the announcement to be bittersweet, especially given the state of public safety in Minnesota today. So here to talk about this more is Ms. Adriene Thornton, who was a nurse and infection preventionist with Children's Minnesota. Welcome back, Adriene. We also have Mayor Mike Elliott, mayor for the city of Brooklyn Center. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. Also joining us is Matthew Branch, who is a Brooklyn Center resident, educator, and youth worker. So thank you, Matt, for being here, as well as Dr. Reggie Edwards, who is the acting city manager for the city of Brooklyn Center. Welcome. Thank you for being on Black Life Amplified. Now, I want to go ahead and get started with the conversation, but I want to bring in some context and give some folks space for what we just experienced within the last 24 hours. So I'd like to ask all of you up first, what is and was your response to the conviction of Derek Chauvin? Adriene, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Brittany. My initial response was joy, coupled with tears of joy and sorrow. You know, it has been a long time coming, and being a Southerner first, because I am from Georgia, born and raised, and moved up here to get away from the Jim Crow South and all of the laws and actions down there. I think I may have a little bit of a different perspective because, you know, again, it was the entire murder of George Floyd gave me PTSD. And it took me back to my days of living in Georgia, seeing the KKK doing their demonstrations. And so seeing Derek Chauvin on trial and being prosecuted for committing murder, it was as if all of that PTSD was relieved to some point. So even though I was happy with the verdict, and cried tears all evening, still realizing that we have a lot of work to do. And even though I was able to exhale last night and sleep, that doesn't stop the work. And so now that we've exhaled, we have to take our collective energy and our collective breathing and continue the work to make sure that justice continues to be served throughout the country.
Very well said. I want to go next to Matt Branch. Matt, what was your response when you found out that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 counts?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. Honored to be on this panel with my peers right now. My response last night was I had a fleeting moment of joy, but it settled in quickly that we got justice to the best degree we are allowed to get right now, but by no means was this justice. And it just settled in that we have a long road to go still, starting in Brooklyn Center with Ms. Potter, the continuation of the Derek Chauvin trial with the other officers. It's not over, and I think that weighed hard on me last night, was that we, as hard as we had to push to get this, to get Mr. Chauvin convicted, we still have that much harder to push and that much further to go. It's not over. So that was a real weight on me and my family last night. I sat in tears with my kids. I couldn't move. I sat there, and yeah, it's a heavy weight, and I just know that we have a long road ahead of us. But I know that change can come, and that we united can continue to push things in the right direction.
Very well said. There is definitely more work to be done, and we're going to talk about that work in just a moment. But first, I'd like to hear from Reggie. If you could tell us, what was your response to hearing about this historic conviction? I think you're on mute.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As I heard, one is a moving moment for me and very powerful. And I do recall maybe one of the family members or someone speaking to and reflected upon Emmett Till and this being similar. And that was my immediate thought also at the time, because not only did Emmett cry out, "Mama, mama, oh Lord, mama, help me, please." And that sort of connected, but also the fact that it was law enforcement that went to the house of his uncle or his family to get Emmett. And it took me back to that moment. So it's powerful, and in knowing that it's been a long time coming. Yes, there's ways for us to go, but Sam Cooke, it's been a long time, but change is going to come. I had the opportunity to talk to my son when I got home, my 13-year-old, and I broke it down to him about what this meant, what was going on, and I was proud to be able to say that, and proud to say that Pops is in a place where he can make a difference. So I'm hopeful. It's powerful. It was historic, and it set the table for me in my life about what I'm supposed to be about.
I really appreciate you bringing in the fact that you're not just in this role as city manager, but you're a father as well, because this is something that impacts us on a political realm, but it also impacts us so deeply personally, right? And I think that's an important piece of context to bring to this conversation. So thank you for sharing that. I want to go to Mayor Elliott now and ask, what was your response when finding out that Derek Chauvin was in fact going to be held accountable for the murder of George Floyd?
Yes, very happy to be here with all of you and be able to, have a moment of reflection and, talk about what's happened so far with the Derek Chauvin case and the state of policing, or I should say public safety in general. I had the opportunity of sharing that moment with other people, and what I can say is that there was a collective sigh of relief that in this instance, the justice system delivered one milestone on the way to progress in this country on making sure that we get justice for Black people in this country when they are harmed at the hands of law enforcement. So certainly that sense of relief, but immediately following that was the sense that this is only the beginning and that we have so much more work to do. So it was certainly the history of the moment, I think, was gripping for all of us.
Most definitely. And there is so much work that still needs to be done, right? And I think about that, especially as we think about getting justice now for Daunte Wright. And so I want to ask you, Adriene, as a mother of a Black son, when you heard about the murder of Daunte Wright, you speak of George Floyd's murder giving you PTSD, and then you hear about this young Black man whose life was taken in the midst of our city trying to grieve and heal and move forward. How did that impact you to hear about what happened to Daunte Wright?
It really, it scared me. I'll be honest. My son is 27 and he is a special needs adult. And so cognitively, he functions at about the level of an 8 to 10-year-old. And so even though I try to have, conversations with him about how to maintain his safety, what is appropriate to do in social settings, he doesn't necessarily understand that. And so if he was to be approached by the police, my fear is that he would try to get away because he doesn't understand that these strangers who are perhaps trying to help him are, not trying to harm him. He may try to fight them. He may try to run away. And so my fear is that they will misunderstand him and he may be harmed in the process. The one blessing that I have is that I live in a small town. And because we've been here so long, depending on who's working, we know the police officers, they've done visits, when he was in high school. And so they know him. But if we're not just in our little city, if we're the next city over, or if we're in another part of Minnesota, they're not going to know him. And they're not going to know that he doesn't understand what's going on. And they are not going to know that he is developmentally delayed. And so, my fear is that he may be harmed. But, the scary thing for me was when I first heard that he initially got pulled over for having an air freshener hanging from his mirror in his car. I've been in Minnesota 20 years. I did not know that that was a law that is on the books in Minnesota, that you cannot have anything hanging from your rearview mirror. I've always had air fresheners. I love them. I immediately went to my car and took my air freshener out of my car because I don't want to give any police officer any reason to pull me over that may put me in danger. And so it was very disheartening to hear about Daunte. It literally just broke my heart. My heart goes out to him and his family. And, all I can do is continue to try to have these conversations with my son, hope that some piece of these conversations resonate with him to the point that he actually understands. But, the issue is, and I was telling someone this morning, as Black people, we are raised having these conversations. If you get stopped by the police, there's a certain way you act and there's a certain thing you do so that you're not placed in harm. And what we've seen over the last few years is it doesn't matter what we do, we are still in harm. So even if you do stand there with your hands in your lap and you don't move a muscle, you still may be harmed. So what are we supposed to do? Anything we do puts us in harm's way when it comes to the police in certain situations. So it's a scary time for us. And I hate that happened. And, again, my heart goes out to his family, and we just have to keep pushing for change.
I remember my parents telling me that it's illegal in the state of Minnesota to have anything hanging from your rearview mirror. And I remember thinking how dumb of a law that was, and I don't think I wanted to hang anything more than probably an air freshener in the first place. It's heartbreaking to think at how these minuscule infractions could lead to the loss of life, especially when we see things like what we just witnessed yesterday. Derek Chauvin had his day in court. He was able to sit in the courtroom every day to have justice play out the way that it's supposed to. Daunte Wright, regardless of whether or not he violated any law, will never have that day in court. And that is what is so devastating to me and for so many Minnesotans especially. And so protesters have been taking to the streets, occupying the Brooklyn Center Police Department outside, rallying around the spot which Daunte was shot, just to pay their respects and to honor the life that was lost. Someone who's been on the front lines is actually Matthew Branch. Matt, can you speak to what it's been like being on the front lines and kind of what your experience has been like?
Yeah, thank you. Being down outside of BCPD, down on 63rd, where the murder took place, it's been impactful. It's been, I would say, life-changing for myself. I'm, being a BC resident, having been pulled over by Brooklyn Center cops before, having had some of these interactions with Brooklyn Center cops before. The first thing that came to mind for me was, I am Daunte Wright. I could have at any point been or could be Daunte Wright. So that really hit home. And I think that was a lot of the sentiment of the people on the ground was this could have been prevented. It could have been me. It could have been my brother. It could have been my son. And that's just been very powerful to see the people coming together in a positive way. The protesters they've been amazing on site as far as keeping it peaceful. As we know, there's always individuals within a crowd who can instigate things, but the collective people as a whole have been amazing to see gathered outside. There's been and I think Dr. Edwards can speak to this, but there's been murals put up. There's been places of healing that have been taking place, gatherings, places for people to gather and pray together. The community of Brooklyn Center has come together directly across the street from BCPD, housed at the Blue Barn inside of Brooklyn Center High School, and collected donations since this has happened, and they are providing those resources and to the direct community around Brooklyn Center and the apartments who've been affected by just the mass amount of people who've been down there.
Yeah, thank you for naming that about the positive ways that people are responding, not just in protesting, because I don't think that's a negative thing at all, but there's also been an overwhelming response to support the Brooklyn Center community. I saw that one school wanted to raise like $1,000 to support their young people, and they ended up raising like $100,000. And now they're going to distribute that money through a few organizations to make sure that other youth in need have access to those resources. But that's something that's so powerful to me, particularly about Minnesota. And we've seen it time and time again with Jamar Clark, with Philando, with George Floyd, now with Daunte Wright, is when these tragedies happen, our community responds in such beautiful and positive ways. And we often don't get a lot of credit for it. That message is often left out of the media.
Sorry for the wait. I know we've been in a number of times on this case, but the last docketed financial statement is from January.
Oh. Sorry about that. Adrienne, I'm going to pivot to you. I'm hearing some interference in the background right now. Adrienne, if you want to take over, I want to ask about if we anticipate Daunte Wright being the officer who killed Daunte Wright being held accountable.
Okay, thanks, Brittany. So, Reggie, do you want to take on that question about accountability? We can go around the panelists as well.
Sure. I think that the Chauvin verdict will certainly impact um, the trial coming up for Ms. Potter in a couple of different ways in the context of impacting the public, how jurors show up, how they see, how they think about this has, I think, will have some fundamental change. The justice system itself, again, thinking about the jurors and how they deliberate and how they think about cases as opposed to previous scripts in history, mental scripts that folks would show up with, who show up with, show up, the diversity of the jury, again, how it's processed, how it's prosecuted, how it's defended. I think the Chauvin case impacts all of that. It also impacts government. It impacts, if you think about how police officers showed up, how did they stand? How did they view? And I think that the Chauvin case presents a different perspective of possibility. And so I think it will impact it in that way. As again, how does government, in all of its government, from administration to economic development to other areas to its law enforcement, how it thinks about and how it shows up. I think that the use of body-worn camera that will fundamentally change and impact, and that was heavily used, and I think that that's different. And there's video footage from this case for the Daunte, for Daunte. And last, and at least from in my perspective, I think the spirit of the Chauvin trial and the verdict, that spirit will carry, and I think it will matter. So I think it will significantly impact the outcome and the verdict in the trial for Ms. Kim Potter. And let me last say, I do want to also say that my heart goes out to the Chauvin family. I don't want to have this conversation and not, the Wright family and not recognize the hardship and the harm and the devastation of the Floyd and the Wright families.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's great perspective because the impact is much further reaching than just this one trial. I think it will impact courthouses around the country, but I think also it's going to impact the psychological state of others and knowing that it's no longer okay to just murder a Black person just because. And so perhaps we'll start to see a ripple effect over the next few years. So I'm going to pivot now to the mayor. Just wanted to ask a quick question. Do you think there will be a settlement for Daunte Wright's family in the anywhere near the amount that we saw for George Floyd's family? Do you think it'll be smaller? And, you know, why do you think the settlements will be different between those two cases?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, it's hard for me to say at this moment what a settlement will look like for the Wright family. I know that a life is priceless. There's no amount of money that you can put to that. You know, no life is more important than another, and you know we want to work with the family to make sure that we do right by them. And so it's a bit early for us to know what a settlement might look like, and so it's difficult for me to speak on that at the moment. But I just want to express my condolences for the with the family again. I'm looking forward to being in attendance at the funeral tomorrow and just grieving with them and helping to see Daunte off. We're still, all of us, grieving. We're still continuing to hold the family in our prayers, and we want justice out of the situation for Daunte and for his family, and we want to make sure that the family is made whole, most definitely.
Wonderful, thank you. And I know that you all have been boots on the ground in Brooklyn Center. Has anyone had conversations or talked to Daunte's family about the state that they're in and what they're hoping will come out of the potential trial that we hope to see occurring soon? Reggie or the mayor,
Sure.
anyone? Go ahead.
And I'll let the mayor do it because the mayor has been our primary contact who's been in communication with the Wright family. So, Mr. Mayor, you want to take this one?
Yes. I visited with the family, spoke with all of Daunte's cousins and aunts and uncles and his mother and father, and to the person, they all said to me, we want justice. And I can remember, I think it was perhaps the father who pointed to a t-shirt one of the family members was wearing that had a picture of this beautiful young man on it, Daunte, and said to me, we want that. Can you give us that? Can you give us that? That's what they want, is their son back. And so we're that's what they want, is they want justice. They want the highest level of accountability possible for their son. And so in terms of the actual outcome of the case or the charges, I get in trouble if I start talking about what the officers should be charged with or not. But one thing I will say is that the first officer ever to be convicted of murder in the state was a black man, black police officer, and he shot, or said that it was an accident when he shot um, Justine Diamond, a white woman, and he was charged with murder, even though he said that was an accident, and he was convicted of murder. And so I think we have to make sure that the law is fair and just in all cases, no matter a person's race, no matter the racial dynamics that are at play. We just have to make sure that there's full accountability and fairness in this case. So that's all I can say about that at this point. But just that the family wants justice, real justice.
Thank you for that. And I agree, all that any of us want is for the administration of justice to be equivocal for all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, and for all situations to be treated in the same manner so that everyone gets treated no matter what happened, what the situation was. But if one is a murder, then the other should also be a murder. So thank you for that. Mayor, I have another question for you. After Daunte Wright was killed, protesters noticed a blue line flag flying outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department. Are you aware of the flag being there prior to Daunte being killed? Do you interpret the flag or any other behavior from the Brooklyn Center Police Department as a signal that they are unwilling to break the blue line or the blue wall in an effort to protect or convict Kim Porter? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for that question. I was not aware that the flag was flying at the police department prior to it being brought to my attention after protesters were at the police station. When it was brought to my attention by organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union and other people. And they said, Mayor, this flag is here and it's inciting. It's making people um, look at the department as though they're not listening. That this is a symbol that's going to cause harm in the community. I then uh, gave the direction to have the flag removed from the department, and so it's been removed. In terms of officers in the department testifying in the case, I can't speak to that. I just don't know. We know that in Minneapolis, there were a number of officers who testified in the Derek Chauvin case, who testified for the state, for the prosecution, and I think that was laudable. I really do commend the chief and some of the other officers and detectives that came forward and testified and said that there was negligence involved, or however they termed it. I think it's important that there's a real partnership between police and between the community, and that there's accountability inside the police department as well of one another, and a willingness to speak up when they see something that ain't right. And so, it's left to be seen what involvement the department might have in the case from that standpoint, but it's just too soon for me to be able to say.
Thank you for that. Yes, at Children's Minnesota, we have a saying that I am 200% accountable. I am 100% accountable for me, but I'm also 100% accountable for you. And so if I see you doing something that is wrong or non-compliant or may cause harm to our patients, then it is my responsibility to hold you accountable to our Children's Minnesota standard. And so, definitely, I think we all had a collective sigh when we saw the Chief Arredondo and the other officers exhibiting that 200% accountability, 100 for themselves, but also for their officer who had not done the right thing, and they knew he didn't do the right thing. They were brave and they were strong, and they stood up and said, "You did not do the right thing, and therefore this blue line will have to be crossed." So kudos to Chief Arredondo and the other officers that testified. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your bravery, and continue to do the right thing. So, Mayor, one more question for you. In light of everything that's happened, and with us having the verdict out and it being a more positive verdict for George Floyd, will Operation Safety Net continue to be used in the city of Brooklyn Park, or will we pull back from Operation Safety Net? What are the public safety plans going forward?
Well, that's a very important question. We've been working collectively to our city staff and leadership have been working with our law enforcement partners in the region to make meaningful adjustments to the Operation Safety Net plans as it impacts Brooklyn Center. We are continuing to have those discussions. The Operation Safety Net itself, I believe, is entering a different phase now that the Derek Chauvin trial has ended. We're working closely with the other law enforcement agencies, municipalities in particular, in the region to help construct a model that's going to ensure security not only for businesses but for people and for protesters and for our neighbors. And so we see it as a multi-sided approach. going forward. We also see it as an approach that really depends heavily on community involvement. So we have partnerships in the community, and Reggie can speak to this as well. We have formed partnerships in the community, organizations and people who are working directly with the crowds in the protests and the front lines, and helping to make sure that where you have one or two bad apples that may want to throw something, well, I shouldn't say bad, but people who want to maybe engage on a different level with law enforcement, they're engaging those individuals and defusing and de-escalating the situation. At the same time, law enforcement, we've been working with them to make sure that they are practicing de-escalation and implementing various strategies, not being, so visible and not making it look like a military state, with having National Guard everywhere. Quite honestly, I think you're going to see a lot of that start to scale down now that we're going forward, and I think we have more of an understanding of this shouldn't just be a response that is so heavy-handed when it comes to Black people out protesting, especially when you contrast that with other situations where you've had, let's say, the uprising at the state capitol, at the U.S. Capitol, for instance, where the response was nowhere close to what we see here. And so I hope that answers your question and gives you a little bit of an idea of the approach that we're taking moving forward.
Yes, that's very helpful. And I think we all agree that getting the community involved is very important, because the community is responsible for community. And so the more we get them involved, the better our outcomes will be. And I have to say, I was driving home from Minneapolis one day last week, and I saw the National Guard in their trucks on a corner at the corner of Lake and Cedar Avenue. And it was a bit unnerving. It reminded me of what we saw over in Europe after the bombing, the bombing in Barcelona. And so to have that kind of presence in our city for this type of situation, where we didn't have a bombing, we didn't have an international event in terms of the entire country being in danger, but we had military personnel on corners and in the streets and in front of buildings, as if we did. So it will be nice to see that pulled back, and again, having the community partner with helping to move forward. So Matthew, I want to turn to you now, because I know you've been boots on the ground, and just want to ask you, what has it been like on the grounds in Brooklyn Center since Daunte Wright was killed? Do you feel like protesters were able to assemble and use their First Amendment rights?
For the most part, yes, and I think that sentence right there is part of the problem. There shouldn't be a "for the most part." It should be yes, they were allowed to exercise their rights. I think part of that comes with not understanding who is in the crowd or what is fully happening. And I think that can go back to the Operation Safety Net. What is the number, like $30 million or something they spent on that? If you invested $30 million on actually figuring out who is in that crowd and removing them or dealing with them accordingly, who is causing any issues or unlawfulness, we would be in a different place as a collective, as a community, as a state, as a nation. But it's been powerful. I go back to what I said earlier about the people coming together, and they have been out there to peacefully assemble and make their voice heard. They demand that their voices are heard. We demand that our voices are heard, and it's been a struggle when there are a few in the crowd who do not look like the rest, who are not there for the same message and with the same goal as the rest, and are there to instigate and agitate and incite the police response. So yeah.
Then in your boots on the ground activity, Matthew, were you finding that the military presence brought comfort to a grieving community, or did it bring more fear, more anger? What were people feeling about having the military present during this time?
No, the military absolutely agitated things. I don't think the presence was welcomed. It was not what was needed in a grieving state. The people are peaceful. The people have been peaceful. The people will continue to be peaceful. There's no reason to intimidate or place them there. I think it was too heavy of a preemptive move. Absolutely. And I can, as far as BCPD goes, I can when they left the scene on 63rd and that initial response to the killing, everything calmed down. It went from a state of aggression and agitation to a state of peacefulness and mourning and healing. And I can speak to Dr. Edwards. He has listened to the community members. They have passed the message on that let's remove some of the police and some of the military presence from the BCPD area. And the nights that happened, there was no altercations between groups. And I think that just having them removed from the area definitely brings a sense of peace, and brings the community back together and brings the focus back to what we were initially out there for, which was the murder of Daunte Wright, and not the agitation between the police on the other side of the line and the military around the community. I was driving over north yesterday, coming from a school I was at, and I got home and I told my wife, I feel like we live in an occupied state right now. There's military everywhere. I wouldn't feel safe or peaceful walking down the street, even getting out at Subway on the corner of Lowry and Penn right there just to get something to eat. They're everywhere. That's intimidating, and that's not what the community needs or wants, and that's not helpful, and that's not bringing about any change. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So that is a great segue into my next question. And Dr. Edwards, this is for you because you have been listening to the residents of Brooklyn Center, hearing their complaints, hearing their cries. What have you heard from the residents about how the social unrest is impacting their day-to-day life? I'm sure it's had some type of impact, much of it perhaps not good, but what have you been hearing from the residents about the direct impact to their day-to-day life?
Sure. It is very, like in any community or with any group, there's differences. It depends on how you show up in what's your circumstances. So I'll at least identify at least four, at least in my mind, as I've spoken with residents and talked to residents. I'll first start with residents as I tried to, in most of the days, almost every day of the protest, either I'll spend time in the midst of the protesters. I also spent time from the police department on the roof and overlooking and trying to get various viewpoints of what was happening and what's going on. So there's several times when I was in the crowd and having conversations with folks and someone say, well, I live around the corner. So that resident that wanted a chance to raise their voice, to talk about the pain that was in their heart, they appreciate it and they wanted the opportunity and they welcome Brooklyn Center being a place and a safe space for folks to raise their voice around pain that they rightly are due. So that's one group of residents. And there's another group that felt like they want to help. There's something that they want to do. Is there anything that they could do where they may not have been impacted in the same way or may not have experienced the same thing or felt about things in the same way as others, but they want to simply help. So they're reaching out to find out how can they be helpful. There are some residents, maybe a close proximity to the police station, that were scared. We relocated families, up to 114 plus families we relocated with Red Cross and other organizations. And so some families were scared. Then there are some who think that they didn't want the protest. They didn't want all of this happening in Brooklyn Center. And they wanted simply due process. and want to have things again play out. And I simply hope that when we talk about due process, that we want due process in all aspects and for all folks. So it's not just due process for some and not for others. But nevertheless, there are some who advocate or talked about we should have due process, and we don't necessarily need all the protests, etc., that there's a process. So again, there's a diversity of thought, perspectives, and experiences within the community. But in the end, they all wanted peace, which is the beauty of it. And what I hope to, with the mayor and others, what we may be able to bring to our community over time is that no matter which group they're from, they all wanted peace. And we know that for the peace to happen, we have to take care of things on the front side. So if we wouldn't have things happening on the front side, which caused the protests and all of that, then they would be at peace. So we need to help us focus on what's the true solution and resolution to that peace that we seek.
Wonderful. Thank you. You know, one of the most important things we can do is listen. Listen to what people are saying, and then make decisions and actions based on what we're hearing. So as we come to a close, I just want to get a couple of more comments and thoughts from our panelists. Matthew, I want to go to you because I get really excited when I start talking about young people. I am very proud of our young people. I am very hopeful in our future because of our young people. And I know that you work with our youth in Brooklyn Center. And so how can our young people in Brooklyn Center be supported in this moment? You know, because they're out there, they're protesting, they want their voices heard. How can we support them in doing what they need to do during this time?
Yeah, thank you for that. And the first thing I'll say is between the three cities, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, and Minneapolis, they're the same kids. Those two North Metro cities, the kids go between the three seamlessly. They don't know the difference. They don't understand the difference. Not in that sense. They understand the difference, but they see them as one city, as one community, and they work between the three. They live in the three. They go to school in the three. So the communities are tied across the board. And with that being said, I think Monday was a good example of what the young people need, and that was the walkout organized across the state. I ended up going downtown with a group of young people, and what I saw was extremely powerful, and I would say more powerful than anything I could have organized as an adult, or anything I could say as an adult, anything I could do as an older adult person. What they accomplished that day was more powerful than anything. Their voices were heard, their anger, their frustration, and their hope as well. I think that was a big part of it. They are hopeful. They know that this is a long road ahead of them. They're tired of seeing their peers no longer show up to class because of police violence. And I think what we as adults right now need to do is just support them where they're at, and that's meet them where they're at, and let's help guide and coach and protect them. That is the big thing. We're the ones that can vote right now, so we are the ones that make those changes on a systemic level. But that doesn't mean their voices aren't just as important or more powerful than that, and they will be the ones voting soon. So how are we coaching, guiding them? To speak to the protest downtown, one of the things I noticed was the kids were congregated in the center, but if you looked around, there was a group of educators, adults who had encircled themselves around the young people, and that visual was just amazing to see. That was an older generation there, not to make sure the kids didn't get in trouble, but to make sure others were not there to harm or disrupt the kids' events. And so I think that's just a powerful message, and it was a powerful visual to see, was the kids standing together, united, speaking their truths, unapologetically, just as raw as can be. And they have every right to do that. And it is our job to protect them and guide them and make sure that they are successful in doing that.
Thank you for that. And that's a wonderful visual of all of us adults encircling our young people and protecting them and supporting them in all of the work that they're doing. Thank you for that. And so as we come to a close, I want to give Mayor Elliott and Dr. Edwards an opportunity to give your last message. And we'll start with you, Mayor Elliott. What is your message to the people of Brooklyn Center and Minneapolis and perhaps in the country? What do you want to say to them in relation to the current situation in your city moving forward, hopefully coming out of the Daunte Wright situation in a more positive light?
Well, thank you for the opportunity once again to be here with you and to share this moment with all of us that are participating in this forum. We're living through history. We are in a phase of history whose run-up included the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, and now we're engaged in that continued fight for justice and equality. The conviction of Derek Chauvin all over this country, I think, signals. I believe the quote the New York Times had from a Harlem resident was, the Derek Chauvin conviction represent, quote, a little bit of justice. The Attorney General spoke last night and said that it represents progress, not justice, but progress. George Floyd's beautiful little daughter, Gianna, is still without a father. And so while the person who murdered him is going to be in jail, we still don't have George Floyd here. We don't have him here. I think we need to keep that in mind. And with the Daunte Wright case moving forward, we all have to ensure that the same strength that was shown and dedication to justice with George Floyd is shown with Daunte Wright. This is a time of reckoning. There's no reason why anyone in the United States of America should go without rights, without equal rights, without equal protection, without equity in all regards. There's no reason why Black people or any people of any shade of their skin in this country should fear anybody else, whether it's a law enforcement officer that is behind them in a vehicle or in any other setting, any more than anybody else. There's no reason why, particularly, specifically, Black people should have lower home ownership rates, should have lower amounts of resources dedicated to their schools, to the schools where they're predominantly Black, or neighborhoods should be policed by people who, and I'm be honest with you, like in my city, who don't live in the city. You got to have equity across the board. The time is now. Nobody's waiting anymore. Everybody's rising up all across this country and across the world, and the people are saying the time is now. They want full equality now. They want full justice now, and they're no longer willing to wait. And we need everybody, white, Black, Asian, Latino, no matter your background. If you are a fellow human being and you care about life, then we ask that you join in that fight for full equality and full justice in all aspects of life. So it's been my honor and pleasure to be here and to share this time with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Elliott. And I agree, it is definitely a time of reckoning for us all. And Reggie, what would be, Dr. Edwards, do you have any final words you want to share with the community? Words of encouragement, guidance?
Yes, My thoughts in my mind gravitate back towards what are we learning in the moment that would carry us forward? As a master of my craft of public administration, I think about, again, how do we bring resolution? So if the problem of Black men being killed by law enforcement, what is the path as relates to resolutions? And I think about change, I think of it in a systematic way. I think of the context of patterns behavior. I think about structure, and I think about mindset as the underlying levels that are needed to be changed in order to change the event about Blacks being killed by law enforcement. I had the fortune of writing a paper for the National Forum for Black Public Administrators and the National Office of Black Law Enforcement around police law enforcement transparency and accountability, and went through that process of how do we change the system in a systematic way. I won't give the rundown, but there are some things that we practice, and I would share with you what I thought and what I believe is foundational. Two things. One, community and city law enforcement engagement together is foundational. There cannot be solutions, from my perspective, without that at the table, that mixture at the table. And that will be a challenge because we do not have a historical practice, a historical script, or a know-how of how to do it. So when I think about, and when people say, look at best practices or look at what's happening around the world, look at other places where it's worked, in my mind, things have never worked. And so what is it that we do different? And again, what I've learned and what I'm finding, community and city law enforcement at the table together in the beginning and the end is foundational, from consciously generating ideas to sharing understanding and perspective, which gives way to insight of what may be possible. And then out of that shared understanding emerges new possibility. And that can't happen in the absence of one of those segments or one of those lenses. So to me, that's foundational. And then the last part is being systemic about the change. It's simply not having trying to impact just a policy or either training or training of officers or even economics within community and so forth. We have to be able to think systemically. And so again, that's something for me that we look at: what are our practices, what are our behaviors, what's the structure, what are the policies, and then foundational, what are the mindsets? Because I believe that our law enforcement is an instrument that grows out of the mindset of society. So until society makes changes, and if we need to work on that, if we want to make true fundamental change within law enforcement and with the problem in which we're addressing. I appreciate the chance to talk with you. Welcome other opportunities for us to be in dialogue so that we may learn from each other and help to make changes. And I am feeling blessed that I'm here. And again, heart goes out to the Floyd and the Wright family. And I pray that we will do better. And I believe that we will do better.
Thank you so much for that. And I thank you to all of our panelists today for your time and your attention and your encouragement, your guidance, your love. It is very much appreciated. We want to send out our deepest condolences to those mourning the loss of George Floyd, Daunte Wright, Kobe Hessler, and so many others. And please do what you need to do to honor your mental health today and every day. We want to encourage all of our community members to continue to get tested for COVID-19, especially if you're assembling in large crowds. You've been watching Black Life Amplified, the virtual town hall series brought to you by the African American Leadership Forum, Northpoint Health and Wellness, Insight News, Gray Matter, Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. Thank you. And to everyone who works behind the scenes, there's a lot that goes on that you all don't see to make this happen. And we also want to make sure that we thank our guests and our previous hosts and team members who have made this possible for the last year. It has been my honor to participate in this, and I look forward to our continued participation and bringing news and information to our community. Everyone, live your best life. Have a great day, and we will see you this Friday.